All right, so good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Hong Kong U Social Sciences curriculum. So today we are very happy and excited to have Professor Ning-Xin Hao to share with us some of her recent work. So let me just have a very brief introduction of Professor Hao. So Professor Ning-Xin Hao is the Benjamin H. Griswold III Professor in Public Policy and also in Department of Sociology at Johns Hopkins University. So he was just, he is the former, so he just stepped down, my understanding, last year as the director of the Hopkins Population Center, which is one of the major population center in the United States. And now is the current director of the scientific core of HPC. So Professor Hao has been published in different areas, but mainly her strength is in my interpretation may not be correct, is in methodologies and especially the quantitative method. So I think she is the one who introduced the profile regression to sociologists. And so she wrote a book on the profile regression. One thing is very I think it's worthwhile to mention is that sociologists usually, only a few number of sociologists collaborate with economists because we usually don't, for sociologists, we may not have the gut to collaborate with economists because they think that, well, your econometrics are not as good as us. But then Professor Hao is one of the very few sociologists collaborate with the top economists in the US. So we know that her even econometric skill must be very strong. So today we are very happy to, she is going to present with us some of her recent work, which is on the prenatal exposure to extreme heat and child development of American infants. So let us welcome Professor Hao.
Thank you so much, Eric. I thought that you're going to mention something like we actually share some years in University of Chicago, but you did not. Anyhow, thank you for the introduction. So I was really honored. And thank you so much for the opportunity to invite me to visit this very prestigious university and faculty, and give me the opportunity to speak to the faculty that is multidisciplinary. So today, I'm going to talk about one of my very recent projects, and as listed here, the title. So it is about the climate change and exposure to climate and infant development. Let me introduce my multidisciplinary team, and here the team include Ben Zinchik is a geoscientist, and Sarah Johnson as a public health scientist, and myself as sociologist. So give you an overview of the this study is a use a multidisciplinary approach to examine the impact of the natural system on the human system. And here we try to use geoscience to understand the natural system, and we use public health science and sociology to understand the human system. And we're going to integrate the three disciplines to address the process of how this natural system will impact on human system. Specifically, this study investigates the extreme heat across space and over time. And here we need to measure heat waves and downscale heat waves data to human society's spatial units. And then the heat waves is out there, and we need to connect it to the human system, that is the exposure. And we particularly looking at the prenatal exposure to extreme heat. And then the outcome is not the prenatal outcome, but it is the postnatal outcome. It's up to 12 years old during the infancy. And we look at the processes through which prenatal extreme heat exposure affect the infant development. This study is built on the environmental health literature, and particularly the literature on the extreme heat exposure on for health outcomes. This review paper concluded that prenatal exposure to extreme heat is life-threatening for mother and fetus, causing severe maternal morbidity, mortality, and preterm birth. Studies on the social determinants of health reveal that the heat exposure actually is disproportionately affect poor and minoritized population and places. However, several reviewed articles pointed out that most of the research has focused on acute and chronic diseases and mortality. The literature is very little on the lasting effect of prenatal heat exposure on the development in the first year of life. As we all know, infancy is a very important life stage. It lays a foundation for health, learning, and productivity across the life course. This is according to health policy analyst and economist like Heckman. Talking about economists. I don't know. So we identify this gap, and then the gap is very important to fill, and then trying to fill in the gap. And in order to do that, we resort to the multidisciplinary approach. First is from geoscience. So we need to understand the growing risk of extreme heat here. So among a number of physical drivers, global warming is the anthropogenic force. And then that creates a man-made force to make the extreme heat is become more sustained and more serious. Continuous burning for fossil fuels will release more and more greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide and methane, and these things will trap the heat in the atmosphere. So global warming will amplify the heat waves. So what are the heat waves? Heat waves is defined as a consecutive days, 2 and more days, up to months. And these days will have the heat index that is feel like 102 or more Fahrenheit. And heat waves threaten people's lives. And how to link to the human and the human system, we need a downscale. The heat wave data to human society's spatial units such as census tracts, we all know that, or counties, or zip code. We also turn to sociology and public health, and particularly the life course perspective. Both disciplines use life course perspective, and originally from Glenn Elder in 1974, and other life course scholars, we emphasize a number of principles of life course perspectives. The first one is about the time and the place of socially defined life events. In this study, we will say that preterm birth is one of the life events, or the infant development milestone attainment are other life events. So the timing of the birth is earlier than expected. That's the preterm birth. And then the sequence of the events, for example, is the lack of achieve the milestone of infant development. And this will be the timing and sequence of these events will be very important. But not only the timings, but also the place of where this event occur. So the local context that we need to take into account, and I will tell you why is that. So then The other principle is life time dimensions. And this is not only the individual time, that's the chronological age, but also historical time, referring to the social change or some events that affect the whole society. The most recent historical time importance is the pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic. Or you can say that it is the AI use since November 2022. That's, penetrating the whole society. We also have a generation time and different generations like baby boomers versus the Gen Z, and they experience a different kind of events that it is, particularly for them. The next principle I want to emphasize is the linked lives. Individual lives are not, independent of each other, but it's interdependent, particularly through family, parents and children, as well as the networks of a family, and which may, form the communities. So we'll also pay attention to the community. All this we highlight the structural, social, and cultural context of individual agencies who are making decisions and making transitions in the life course. And this will turn our attention to the community conditions. Life course perspective is also taken as a child development theory. And here is very, significant one is in the public health and epidemiology, where emphasize the childhood origin of adult diseases. And for infants and children, there are increasing surveillance and screening of their development. And here we have, break down the child development into 5 domains for infants, and for communication, social and personal development, cognitive development, problem solving, and fine motor and gross motor. And these developments would, further granularized into 5 stages during the 1 year, the first 1 year of the life. That's infancy. So the next, we need to know how this process occur. What is the process of exposure to extreme heat on infant development? We introduce the concept of exposure. Exposure is defined as having no protection from harm. And then related to exposure, 2 important questions are when we need to identify the critical timing of exposure, and where we need to identify the child's residence location so that it is, we can identify where the exposure occurred. Continuing with the where, now we, as a sociologist or social scientist, will immediately think about the community, or the local population and place. And introduce another concept here is vulnerability. Vulnerability on conditions with a high probability of being harmed. And here we have 2 constructs. One is the place of vulnerability, the other is the population. The place and vulnerability have this, including the dimension of a social environment, for example, the healthcare system. So you lack of it or you have full of it. Or the civic and social and religious organizations and groups and populations together. We also have another construct is called built environment. And this built environment, you can think about the lack of parks, or there are many of the polluting, facilities, and the access to very good public transit, like the one in Hong Kong is a very impressive one, or a lack of it is in Baltimore. That is the city I am. There's just no subway at all. So, so this kind of environment would be, you can imagine how when people exposed to heat waves or other natural disasters, and this kind of social and built environment would be important to reduce or increase the probability of being harmed. Not only the place it matters, but also the people living in that place or communities matters. So we consider demographic compositions, for example, age, structure, and dependency ratio, and the economic compositions like education, income, and housing poverty. And then we also consider the social dimensions is the race and ethnicity or human female-headed households. To unite these ideas, we express the a theoretical framework, and here you can see that in the middle is the child development, and the milestone is to obtain those milestones. Still could not see some of the, that's not, this is not the complete, image. But anyhow, this is the process at the micro level. And then from prenatal time to the infancy time, and then the development is in the 5 domains of development. Such a micro processes is in the human ecology there. So we have this, on the very broad level, we have this extreme heat is from the climate. And then you have, not everybody is exposed to such a heat. So you have this exposure idea. So to link this heat to human being. And then it could be different by the, modified or moderated by the community conditions, including the population vulnerability and place vulnerability. So from such a theoretical framework, I would state the proposition is like this. Infant developmental outcomes are a function of prenatal exposure to extreme heat and the residential community vulnerability. From these propositions, I would like to derive 3 hypotheses. The first one is called delayed hypothesis, which states that prenatal exposure to extreme heat will delay infant development, controlling for the population and place vulnerability of the residential community. The next one is push one step further to ask for causal effect. So we posit that prenatal exposure to extreme heat has a causal effect on infant development. The third one is trying to see that how the preterm birth will play a role, and here is the mediator hypothesis. Preterm birth is a mediator of the effects of prenatal exposure to extreme heat on infant development. That is, the indirect effect is going through preterm birth. In order to test these 3 hypotheses, we have 3 analytic strategies. For the first hypothesis, we use association analysis. The second one, we use causal analysis. And the third one is using mediational analysis. So we use some of the graphic, explanation, expression for the association and the 3 types of analysis. For association analysis, and here we present 4 sets of variables with the arrows connected with them. The color ones are the ones that is you can consider it as the main explanatory variable. That is the prenatal exposure to heat wave, that is highlighted yellow. And then we have the community vulnerability is the brown colored, and the child development is the outcome. And then we have some control variables. So this is like a multivariate regression, and what's the dependent variable is the child development and on the other sets of variables. In the causal analysis, we are concerned whether the prenatal exposure to a heat wave has the error term that is correlated with the dependent variables error. If this exists, then we cannot claim that prenatal exposure to heat waves would have a causal effect. The important thing is to parcel that out. In order to do so, we use the instrumental variable. The instrumental variable here, we use the so in the gray box there, we're using the 7th month in utero, and then if it's happened in between May and September, that is during the hot season. So it is, hot season versus the cooler season, and that could be the instrumental variable. That we use the instrumental variable to predict in the first stage and to predict the prenatal exposure to a heat wave. And the second stage, we're use the predicted prenatal exposure to a heat wave to project the child development. In such a way, we can purge the correlation between the two errors, U and V, so that we can claim that it is a causal analysis post-way. The third analysis is mediational analysis, and here we introduce the variable called preterm birth. So that is a binary variable that has the, one is saying that the birth occur before 37 weeks in gestation. And then, 0 is between 37 to 35 or 40 up to. The literature already established very well that the prenatal exposure to a heat wave have a serious consequences in preterm birth. So that arrow is well established. I don't know how to use this. Sorry. So once we have this, we propose that prenatal exposure to heat waves might have one is a direct effect on the child development during the infancy, and it also could go through the preterm birth and then indirectly affect the child development. To do this three analysis, we use a number of data. The data sources all is not we collected. They are all existing data and try to use the available data to do this analysis. So the main three streams of data. The first stream of data is the child development measures. This is come from the CHADIS. I'm not sure you guys heard of CHADIS. That system is called Child Health and Development Interactive System. It is a clinical process support system used by pediatric providers in about more than 5,000 of them in 48 states in the United States. CHADIS is also adapted by a number of other countries as well. So the original purpose of CHADIS is to implementing questionnaires about child development at the different stages, like 5 stages in the infancy. Each stage, they have specific questions to ask parents or guardians to answer. And then the system immediately summarize these, patterns and then pass it to the doctor, because this is for the child patient to go see the pediatrician. And then while the pediatrician is seeing the child, and the system is analyzing the data and then pass it to assist the pediatricians to make a better diagnosis and recommendations. That's the original purpose of this child's data. So we talk about using this data as for research, because the data collected, the data is for children's, infant patients' development. And it has the time-stamped visit, so you know exactly the time. And then you know that where the child's, residence address there. And these data are very important to link to the climate. For this paper, the most important thing is that we know the child's birth date, and then it is the gestation weeks. So you can imagine when you have the best date in terms of dates, and just the gestation age in terms of weeks, we are able to calculate the conception date, and then to the 7th month in the utero, and also the 3rd trimesters in the utero. So that those kind of processes of prenatal timings could be precisely determined for each of this child. Aside from child development, so this child development is 5 domains, and we see those 5 domains of questions. So we have a measures of that. And then we need to know community levels vulnerability data. And this data is used National Neighborhood Data Archive, NNDA. It's made by researchers in University of Michigan. It's a very good, data at the census checks. And over many years, it's annual. The third data stream is about geospatial climate data. This data right now, we are just use the CDC environmental public health checking. And that system have the, provided the data as daily data of heat index. So it's not only just the temperature. Heat index is based on both the temperature and relative humidity. And the index is a quadratic and interactive function of these 2 factors, and you can make the heat index. So that's the daily data, and it's down to census check. So it's a very granular type of climate data we can get. And so okay, so let me talk about the sample. The sample is from CHADIS data, and we look at children under 12 months old in 48 states from 2010 to 2022. So the person stage count, that means we have an NT count, NT, N is for person and T for the time unit. Here is a stage. We have 5 stages. Not every child have all 5 stages observed. So we have more than 1 million person stage counts. For them, we can have the person counts. How many children altogether we have? We have more than 600,000 children. So the 5 stages, you can see that we have about 51% of the children, that 600,000 children have more than 1 observations. To test those three hypotheses, we have identified 4 key variables. The outcome is the dependent variable, and the treatment is the independent variable. We call that instrumental variables IV, and we have the mediator with it, which is the preterm birth. So how do we measure the dependent variable, the outcome? Here is a composite index of infant development from CHADIS. And we're based on the 5 domains, and those domains, as you see that listed there, and each of the domain includes 6 items, and to ask very detailed questions that the parents would understand what they're asked about. And then the answer is yes, sometimes, not yet, that the child can do something like problem solving, to communicate, or to move, very refined things for the motor. And these items are very clearly stage specific. They are not exactly the same questions because the child develops very fast during infancy. And we, put them all together and make even more, just one composite in this study. And then we standardize this score with a mean at 0 and standard deviation at 1. That is what we call that Z-scores. And these measures are all based on this ages and stages questionnaire that like a handbook there. The treatment is the independent variables, and we call that exposure to heat waves is the treatment, and then it particularly happens in a time window. That is the 3rd trimester of the pregnancy. And heat wave already say that it's defined as 2 or more consecutive days with a heat index 102 or more degree Fahrenheit. And this is from the CDC EPT HT daily data. And then from the daily data, only 1 day, we need to know the consecutive day, so that we are actually making the monthly measures of the heat wave. And then we also include the county level monthly heat waves, and then based on the so it's census checks and then aggregate up to the county, and the county crosswalk to the zip code of the child's actually only the office zip code. So here with this data, we need to have the temporal mapping. So we and spatial mapping, so that we link the natural system and the human system together. That's very key of the linking them together. So we calculated the 3rd trimester of pregnancy, as we say that we have the data, and now we can map the timing of the heat waves, and then we see that if it's mapped, then means that there is exposure to prenatal exposure to heat waves. Heat waves do not occur for the whole country. It has the variations across space, so we need to map the areas, and the human system has a zip code. Zip code could be crosswalk to county, and county would have the monthly heat waves data. So in this way, so we can map both temporal mapping and spatial mapping. So the instrumental variable here is using the binary variables, indicating 7th month in pregnancy occur in May to September. We're just experimenting May to September. And the idea is to, of course, this we can calculate it based on birth date and gestation weeks, so that we can identify which month is happening in which month. the 7th month is happening in which month, right? So the intuitive reason is that there's a much higher probability of exposure to heat waves in hot season. And at the same time, why this is instrumental variable? So what is the requirement for instrumental variable? Instrumental variable should have a very close relationship with the treatment variable, but have nothing, should be very quite uncorrelated with your outcome. We can say that is because the 7th month happened in a hot versus cool season is mostly likely to occur randomly. So this is the one that we can justify. Then of course we're going to test whether this is a good instrument. The mediator is the binary variables indicating preterm birth status. So it is 1 if the gestation is less than 37. And this is a very much established evidence of the PDF is the heavily influenced by exposure to heat waves during the prenatal time. So we can, so then this may play a role once the child is was born prematurely, then the fetus being exposed to the heat waves may continue to add on the burden of a preterm birth in the infant development. So that's the ideas of the indirect cost. So what are the control variables? At this study, we have a set of them. We want to control for the years. And remember, we do the 2010 to 2022. So we have 13 years of data. So controlling for the years, we control for the period effect, anything that happen for the whole population. And so we, for example, this will be the national trends of the weather. So the weather, heat waves is becoming increasing. And as well as the COVID pandemic, we have those 4 years of COVID pandemic during 2019 to 2023. We control for the stage of infancy. So this we have 5 stages. I want to say that at different stages, infants are expected to develop at a different level. So we know, probably you all know that boys and girls develop at a different speed. So girls develop faster than boys. So we have this gender of the infant. We also include community vulnerability. At this point, it's a very rough control here. We just use the population vulnerability for Black Hispanic share. That is the marginalized population composition. I have a dependency ratio and housing poverty. We're not able to control for family level variables. And these variables are only later collected by charters and only available for less than 5% of the sample. So let's look at what's the descriptive pattern look like. So I would emphasize, more on the key variables. We have 4 key variables. So this one is focusing on the dependent variable, which is infant development. And then so we want to look at the stage and the gender differences. So I want to tell you that the measure of the infant development is standardized at each stage. So there's no growth you should expect. So, but it's all over both boys and girls. So from stage 1 and 2, so let's say the y-axis are the z-score for the infant development. So 0 is the mean, and positive is the higher, and the negative is lower than the mean. So from stage 1 to 3, you can see that there is, a pattern that girls develop better than boys. However, they're getting more diverse from stage 3 and they're getting even more at stage 5. So you can see over time, and girls are just taking off than boys. Okay, that's the trend of the, not trend, it's not the growth. Okay, there's no growth you try to get. The next one, I want to look at the instrumental variables, the cool season versus hot season during the 7 months in the utero. So on the left two pairs of bars are for those kids whose 7th month in utero is happening in the cool season. The right two bars is for those whose 7th month happening in the hot season. And I will also show that the red is for female and the male is the blue or gray. So you can see that the outcome, the child infant development is relatively higher when the 7th month is in the cool season than in the hot season. Within each of these instrumental variable conditions, so we can still see that girls are developing faster than boys. Right? So here is, you can see pretty big differences. And then let's switch to the prenatal heat exposure to the heat wave. And here, the left one, the left pair is for exposure to no heat wave, and the right one is for exposure to heat waves. And you can see, it's still, you can see that without exposure to heat waves, they have a better developmental outcomes than with, but the difference is much smaller. The third one is to look at the mediator. The mediator is the preterm birth, PTB. And the left two bars is for no PDP. They are all, they were all born maturely. But then the right one is those who were born before 37 weeks of gestation. So here you can see very large difference. Okay, so this is established the pattern so that we can use these important variables and to do the modeling. So what's the model estimates here? So I put all the estimates in one slide. So we have both the table and the graph. So let's say that we have 3 models. So the first model OLS is used for association analysis. The IV model is for causal analysis, and the mediational analysis will use the mediator. And under that, we have 3, estimates for the mediation. You have the direct effect. DE is a direct effect. IE is an indirect effect, and this is a total effect for that process or mechanisms of prenatal exposure to heat waves on child development. So we look at the data estimates. This is all continuous dependent variables, so the data estimates is very easy to interpret. And then we also show you the standard error. And all these data estimates are expressed in the bars. And all those bars means that they are all lower than 0. The y-axis is still the z-score of the change in the z-score of the child, the infant development. And all the bars are below 0 means they are negative effect. These are all negative effect. And the SEE, you'll see that another bars that you can see, those bars do not exceed the 0 line. That means these all the effects are significant statistically. So all these effects are significant. So here is saying that the tests of the 3 hypotheses are all confirmed, and we have empirical evidence for that. but the size are very different. And the size you can see is alarmingly small. 0.00. So for the OLS, the size, we have like a negative 0.01. However, the IV impact is much larger, it's 0.08. You can see that the red bar. And the total effects and direct effect for the mediation analysis very much like the associational analysis. So what do we say for the hypothesis testing? So the delay hypothesis, so the beta OLS shows that the prenatal exposure to heat wave delays infant development by 1% of a standard deviation. David is laughing. The causal hypothesis, we also confirm that we're using the 7 months in May to September as instrumental variables. And now the beta IV indicated a reduction of 8% of a standard deviation. That's still small. Right? The mediator hypothesis in here that the total is the direct effect is 0.8%, and the indirect effect is 0.1%, and here the direct effect dominates. So how are we going to summarize these findings? So number one, of course, I can tell you they are significant, discernible, significant, negative, weather effect here. So we find evidence to support all three hypotheses. We raise the three, we support them, and these, evidence are discernible and significant effects. Right? We do have it. Now, what's the effect size? So when you look at the 0.00 things, and then we say the effect size. Here is what I understand. I am trying to see if you will agree with me or not. I would like to put it in the context of the negative effect of prenatal exposure to heat waves on PTB, the preterm birth. This is well established already. It's considered as life-threatening. It's a very important, effect. This is 3.7% of the increase in the probability of PTB. Well, I don't want any percentage or increase of PTB. 3.7 is important here. And I'm talking about the scale of the effect here. So here that I'm trying to say that the 8% of the standard deviation is at a similar scale of the 3.7% of the probability. Sometimes I'm trying to see that it is small, and with understandingly small. But number one is significant. It's negative. There's no question about that. Number two is I consider that the natural system is so macro and is so unrelated to the human system. And this human system here, I'm picking at a tiny human being. These are the infants, and that subpopulation. And then you see that, and then looking at the prenatal exposure, is a particular timing when they were just being made, right? They're just being conceived, and then a few months in utero. So it's a very micro processes. So we are looking at their micro processes and the relationship with a very macro phenomena. This is very challenging to study the environmental effect, the climate effect on population. But our goal is really want to know how this, climate change and warming and heat waves increasing will threaten our next generation's life. Right. So anyhow, so let me look at, tell you a lot of limitations in this study. Limitations that in the study I present to you, but I could address, including the following, because we are still extracting the data. Extracting the data, including the child's address and zip code, Right now we are using, so the small, right now we are using just the clinic address, which is publicly available. We are getting the IRB and then getting the, child's address, and they have to be under this HIPAA and from the EHR data, which is very, very toxic, confidential in that way. But it is approved, then we can get that. So then we'll make the exposure to heat waves a lot more precise and accurate. Right, so that's what we're doing. And right now, we don't even control for any race ethnicity. People will ask Ling Sing, are you a sociologist? And I am. And I was going to ask that question. However, the social determinants of health were not accepted until pretty late by the pediatricians. And then they say that, oh, God, I got to ask race and ethnicity, which is a much later time to collect the data. Because the data I am looking at is 2010 to 2020, and they start to collect the data. Not all the pediatricians collect the data, and they started collect data 2016. So you can see that the data is much small, smaller one. But we can get this from not from the charts, but from charts linked to the EHR, and that could be also available. So in the update analysis, I'll be a sociologist. I have race ethnicity there. However, there are many limitations. It's very hard to address. Any data based on patients was subject to sample selection. Who goes to see a doctor? Well, there's many reasons. Some people, particularly subgroup of people, do not go to see a doctor. This is particularly serious for adults. My argument is this sample selection problem is relatively milder for infants. Parents are concerned about their infants. Medicaid will pay for this visit, and social workers and nurses will encourage, parents to take your infant to have a checkup. And there are 5 stages. It means I have 5 opportunities for us to observe one child. So we do have 49% of the children in our sample only have 1 observation, not all 5. You would think that you go to all 5, right? All the parents. So some of them will get to all 5, and there's also other reasons that they change the, the migrants, and they change the. It's linked for all the pediatric offices, but some may not be still participating in charts. So there's many reasons you might not get the complete observations there. So this is hard to address. So of course we can use models to address sample selection bias, but much better you observe them. Family hardship, as I mentioned, these family conditions cannot, recovered because they start very late. And there's a lot of things to do. Child development have a lot depend on maternal health. And the maternal health is seriously under this HIPAA protection, and we're not able to, get the IRB to get the maternal health information. Having said that limitation, I would like to say the other way around, to say that there are strengths in this study. This study, I think the strength is very obvious. One is wide coverage of the national infant population. As a social demographer, I would like to study the whole US population. And this is the one that they cover 48 states and have, the data is on this, child patient to these practices. So this wide coverage you can find anywhere in the existing data sets. We have a massive sample size of over 500,000 infants So it's very hard to get this. We need to have a large, sample size to have the power, right? So here we also will have a panel data. 50%, more than 50% of them have a panel data. We can use it for actually trajectories types of analysis. The most things I want to highlight is we can do very precise prenatal heat exposure. This is, I think, is the very feature of this study. We go down to the very micro level and also time. The time is very in terms of months. So this kind of precision is hard, very hard to get. And then we do observe the child development, infant development after the prenatal exposure. So this is and then the also the address of the child is the zip code, and which can link it to sensitive check. So pretty much many units of sensitive checks. So what's the conclusion for this pretty preliminary analysis here? So here we say that I would like to claim the study will make a contribution to the understanding of how the natural system interact with the human system. This is such a big challenge to us. And this study is just a small step to understand the complex process, how to link it from that to here. The linkage is the most important thing to do. And we provide empirical evidence to support the hypothesis that establish the relationship between prenatal exposure to the heat waves, and it would have a lasting effect, not the immediate effect, have a lasting effect on the next postnatal 1 year of the person's life. So this is pretty significant to me and important, right? So then this will provide critical timing. So we identify the critical timing, prenatal exposure, and then that will allow us to invent, policy intervention, and this will enhance the population health and to guarantee the healthy next generation. So my policy recommendation is, as global warming is progressing, it is more urgent than ever to protect pregnant women from extreme heat. So that's for the policymakers to consider and ponder on. The next step, there's many of them, many I haven't done yet. So here we use the, we'll update the analysis using child residential zip code. It's going to have in a matter of 1 month. And we add the relative heat indices. And right now we use absolute heat indices. And relative will be relative to the local climatology. And we could use the percentile other than the 102 and more degree. So and then there's other things, place vulnerability, create, infant development milestones, and then all others that we need to continue to do. But anyhow, I did not look at the clock. Sorry. Questions and suggestions.
Well, thank you so much, Ning-Xin, to share with us a very, very important topic about the weather and the demography in the U.S. And I guess always it's very difficult to get data at the individual level of on weather data. So I think this is quite a unique analysis. After I listened to the presentation, I thought that, well, it's a bad news to Hong Kong. Hong Kong is so hot. So, but I guess it's in the long run, it's good to do a comparative global study to see whether any effect to the East Asian or even the African country. But anyhow, I guess it's because of time. So we are kind of running out of time. So we still may take a few questions if there's any. Yes.
Thank you so much. This was fascinating. My question is around flipping the focus from community vulnerability to community resilience. Because there's been research, for instance, I'm thinking of Eric Kleinberg's work on heat waves that shows that a vulnerability, especially in the face of extreme environmental events, doesn't work quite so straightforwardly, and things like social support, social capital can actually protect communities that would otherwise be deemed vulnerable. Perhaps that's very difficult to measure for 500,000 families, but I think that could perhaps be something that's interesting as you're thinking about community measures to include. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lai. Which one? Yes, it's on. Yeah, so very good suggestions, and actually we are considering also the recipients at the after measuring the vulnerability. So the vulnerability is the conditions that they are more likely to be exposed to harm. So this vulnerability, I haven't done it in this study yet. We're going to use more systematic measures of a gap to the threshold that is not vulnerable. So we are measuring the gap of many measures, so many measures of vulnerability. So it's like altogether is more than 100 variables. So we cannot just put the 100 variables in there. So we're making something is aggregate them as the aggregate distance between this community's position and the threshold that you're being protected. You're not going to be that. So we measure that one, the gap, and as well as the intensity. So after that, so we're considering resilience. As resilience means that you have to get hit and then you can come back, right? So that's the way that you measure the resilience. So my conceptualization is have 2 points, and in the middle you have some of the natural disasters, heat waves hit, and then see how this communities actually can come back, and then to come back means to protect the people. For example, here you did not expose to the heat. The heat wave there doesn't mean you have to expose, right? You can use the air conditioning. You don't have to expose to it. It is a vulnerable situation making you exposed to the harm. So that kind of measure, I don't know. I would like to talk to you more. It is measuring the resilience, and that based a lot on social capital, how the networks support each other, and then some use the most resources to help with the most vulnerable individuals. Yeah, great question.
Thank you, Ling Xin. Professor Dr. Hao. Actually, at the university.
Ling Xin, no problem.
So at the university at HKU Med, we're actually hosting, surprise, the CEO of a women's association from Sha Tin district, and actually Sha Tin is one of the districts that you can see a lot of wealthy individuals living in, like let's say City One Sha Tin, or they can be living in sort of those industrial housing in near Foshan. So in Hong Kong's demography of this complex demography with mixed-use housing and also to build social capital, imagine if the audience are workers for the CEO for the Women's Association. How do you think the organization can help the women, and what is a good way of co-creating social capital for these vulnerable people in these tough situations? Thank you.
So could I ask you back question? When you think social capital, what's in your mind, and how to define that?
Actually, social capital in the context of women and pregnancy is that women can bring a lot of social values by promoting diversity. There's more empowerment amongst the women to balance the gender, to achieve a gender balance in workforce in Hong Kong. Also to make them aware of how much contribution they implicitly contribute to public health, if it makes sense.
It does. So the association could make it much more effort to get into the individual women, the common people, the common women, and make them connected to each other through the association. So that social capital is based on the relationship and network. Without connecting to other people, so you don't have anything that the social capital you can use to protect you from being harmed, right? So that part is something that the association can play a promoting role to help with build up the network. The network is not only the poor women's network themselves, because you need to have the weak ties and with the richer woman, right? And you have this, different social status and the women together, and then you could just use the resources for the people who need it the most during the critical moment when the wave hits. And some of the women say that there are 100 women are being harmed. Can you just take them, the first day, you can protect them for the second day, and that would be much better than let them to expose to a second day consecutive. So I think when we say social capital, we are based on the relationship among people, which is have to be, I think that the NGOs and play very, very important role on that.
Yes.
Thank you for your presentation, Lin-Xin. First of all, I'm very jealous of the wonderful data you have at disposal. So as a stratification researcher, I just couldn't resist the temptation to ask a question about SES gradient. So I understand that you don't have like variables at a family level, but since you know the child's address, you can easily come up with a measure for like a neighborhood level SES indicator. And I think it will be interesting to see how the negative impact on children vary across different neighborhoods with the poor or rich neighborhoods. So it's kind of like a mediator. So in terms of policy implication, I think it's more useful because you cannot change anything about the environment, but what you can change is the neighborhood environment. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a very good point. And actually the community population vulnerability, including that kind of measure. So we have the community here, ideally is this kids 5-digit zip code, which could be crosswalk to census check. So not exactly, but it's kind of that kind of level. So it's a pretty refined community. And census check as a community is widely accepted by a lot of demographers. So we are measuring the census check crosswalk to the zip, and then we measure this socioeconomic gradients, all the measures we have. So right now I include the housing poverty. And the housing poverty, I particularly emphasizing it is because in housing poverty, you can see how they're exposed to the heat waves, right? So, but there are just literally hundreds of variables from the NELDA. So the things I just mentioned, that we measure the gap between the situation here to the threshold of protecting people, and the intensity of that using a aggregate kind of measure for that particular census tract or zip code. So in a way, so it's a very good way, but it's not good enough. I definitely want to measure the family, and there are questions about family hardship, food insecurity. There's just many good variables from charters, but only 5% of the population have it. I still try to use those because they are exactly those kids' family. So those are important to have the measurements. It's very accurate for the situations that the prenatal exposures occur. Yeah.
So because of the time, we are already 10 minutes away. So we may take 2 more questions. One is at the back, the other one is Parani, and those are the last two questions.
Thank you. So thank you for the insight for sharing. I have a question related to the time effect. So I know you harmonized the data over 12 years, but I'm wondering, like, as we all know, the world is becoming warmer and warmer, and maybe there are some more heat waves over the years. So did you also see like there are more preterm births and or more like the children are facing the developmental problems or over the years in your data set, so that we know it's really a trend that like the heat waves are leading to those consequences?
Good question. So the years I covers 2010 to 2022, so 13 years. I look at the I don't know. I just tell you the heat waves measures increasing over this time, and the analysis didn't look at the outcome of the child development, how it related to the heat wave is it become worse and worse or not. But my models including the year effect. So the year effect, most of them are not significant. We have one or two. So I cannot actually describing the trends of the child development in relationship with the heat wave. Very good question.
So it's a really impressive set of data and analyses. So my question, so I'm not completely sold on the exclusion restriction assumption of the instrumental variable. I mean, I think maybe there are plausible stories that say, you know, if you're in the 7th month of your pregnancy, you know, you can maybe you can because your heat exposure is a heat wave, you know, more than 2 days of exposure to very hot days. But then you can have very acute events, so very 1 day exposure. You could just have a really hot day, and the mother could be very dehydrated. That could or the mother could, you know, the placental blood flow on a you could have a very acute event on 1 day. That increases the risk of preterm birth. Yeah, dehydration would be another way. So you don't have to wait for 2 or more days. You could just have an acute event on just 1 day. So I'm not completely sold on the instrumental variables analysis, but I do think you can identify maybe causal effects using like sibling fixed effects models. So if you can identify siblings in your data. Then you get rid of all this race ethnicity business, you get rid of all the socioeconomic shared environmental business, and you can look at variations in exposure prenatally to heat waves, as well as to sibling differences in child development.
Thank you for the suggestion. So fixed effect indeed is a very, very important way to get to the causal effect. Here, we'd like to address the question about 1 day exposure to 1 hot day versus exposure to 2 consecutive and more days. So this is, I am very new to the area. So I am just following the literature. The literature saying that heat waves are defined by at least 2 consecutive days. 1 day, I think that in general, maybe not all the women and pregnant women as well. So I can actually address, because the outside is so hot, the inside is 96 degrees. So 96 versus 102, and in 1 day during night you can just adjust it back, and in 2 days you continue to hit, and then that would be a life-threatening. So I think it's the threshold of a life-threatening, or is it getting really sick, right? But you're right, getting sick and hurt the fetus, and the fetus born and become a baby, and the baby development might get affected. This is definitely we could analyze that part. But this one is not related to the instrumental variable. The instrumental variable is the 7th month of this, you know, pregnancy is in the hot month, just the May to September. So May might not be that hot, September might not be hot. I don't want to just say that in July. So that would be just more likely. Right, so you're born and not born. Sometimes once you're indoors and once you're more likely that exposure to the heat waves. And that's the instrumental variable is to say that it is randomly occurred, most likely, not extremely random. So that I think is a one way to do that. Now the fixing effect would be if everybody observes night stages, it would be good another way, even though the fixing effect is not completely addressed the causal relationship yet. But we only have 51% of the children observe more than one. And then for 5, we only have how many percent? Less than 10%. So it's a very incidental, observations of a fixed effect. So it's just too bad. So I cannot also use others. We should try, for subgroup analysis and something like that. Thank you for very good suggestion.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I'm sorry we have to end here because we are really no, not at all. So I guess it's just I think we are running out of time. And before we end, just want to advertise that we are going to have a Population Hub lecture series on Friday. We invited the head of the research unit of the Welfare and Labor Bureau to come to share with us some of the latest finding and the projections about the Hong Kong labor market in the coming years. The labor market, I guess every one of us hear from the news saying that we're shortage of labor, and so we will see how they do the projection. And it's good to hear what they say. So Friday, I guess, is in the afternoon. For those of you, if you have questions related to the topic presented by Ning-Xing, please feel free to talk with her. She will be around in the next 2 weeks in the faculty. So once again, I was saying thank you every one of you participating in this the lecture, and also thank you Ning-Xing for sharing your work with us.
Thank you.